The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a mile in every direction, its walls made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light from deep within. Ambassador Elias Vance stood at the center of this vast space, alone on a platform that seemed to float above an endless darkness below around him. Rising in curved tiers like the inside of some enormous shell, sat 300 representatives from across the known galaxy. Each of these beings came from a species that had conquered the stars long before humanity had learned to write their own names. The Thizari High Speaker looked down at the human from her elevated throne, her insectoid body covered in ceremonial metals that clinked softly when she moved. She had ruled over this council for 600 years and had seen countless young species come begging for membership. None had ever been as small or as weak as the humans. Her mandibles clicked together in a sound that her translator rendered as bitter laughter. You stand before the oldest governing body in the galaxy. Little creature, she said, her voice echoing through the chamber like the sound of breaking ice. Your species discovered faster than light travel merely 18 months ago, and yet you have the audacity to request a place among us. Elias did not move or show any reaction to her words. He had been chosen for this mission precisely because nothing could break his composure. 20 years as a diplomat on Earth had taught him that showing emotion in a negotiation was the fastest way to lose. He had survived assassination attempts, political scandals, and a divorce that had played out on international television. A giant insect laughing at him was not going to shake his calm. The Kreth Dominion had conquered 12 star systems. Before they dared speak in this hall, the High Speaker continued, gesturing toward a section of the gallery where massive reptilian creatures sat in armored seats. Designed for their enormous bodies, the Velthari Communion had achieved biological immortality and spread across 40 worlds before they petitioned for membership. The Velthari delegation glowed softly in response, their bioluminescent skin pulsing with colors that the translator interpreted as smugness and agreement. Even the Axiom Collective, the High Speaker said, pointing toward a bank of dark machines that hummed with computational power, had networked 10,000 artificial minds before joining our ranks. A mechanical voice emerged from the collective speakers, cold and precise. Current human population exists on 1.3 worlds, it announced. Probability of significant contribution to galactic civilization, negligible. More laughter rippled through the chamber. The Kreth ambassador, a creature standing 12 feet tall with scales like polished obsidian, bared his teeth in what might have been a smile or a threat. His species had glass-bombed 3 civilizations into extinction over the course of their history, and they made no secret of their contempt for weakness. I have read reports of your species, the Kreth said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. You still fight wars among yourselves over invisible lines drawn on your planet's surface. Over which of your many gods is the true one? Over the color of your own skin. He shook his massive head slowly. You are children, and violent children at that. Perhaps we should return them to their nursery world, suggested a serpentine creature from somewhere in the upper tiers, and check back in another 10,000 years. The suggestion drew widespread sounds of approval from across the chamber. Elias waited patiently for the noise to die down. He had expected this reception. In fact, he had been counting on it. The intelligence reports from humanity's first contact with other species had made the galactic political situation very clear. The older races saw themselves as the natural rulers of the cosmos, and they viewed any newcomer as either a potential servant or a potential threat to be eliminated. Humanity's rapid technological advancement had already drawn unwanted attention. Several species had begun quietly discussing whether to quarantine the human homeworld before these aggressive little primates could become a problem. What none of them knew, what none of them could possibly suspect, was that humanity had already become something far beyond a problem. The High Speaker raised one of her many limbs to silence the chamber. "Speak. Little human," she commanded. "Tell us why we should grant your species even observer status in this council, let alone full membership." She leaned forward, her compound eyes glittering with cruel amusement. "Amuse us." Elias reached up and adjusted the small silver pin on his lapel, a simple thing bearing the old United Nations emblem that had once represented the hope of a united Earth. He had worn it to every diplomatic meeting for the past 2 decades. It reminded him of what he was fighting for when he finally spoke. His voice was soft, almost gentle. It was the voice of a man who had no need to shout, because he knew that everyone would listen anyway. "Distinguished representatives of the Galactic Council," he began, "I have not come here today to ask you for anything." The chamber grew quiet. This was not what they had expected. "I have not come to beg for membership or plead for your protection." Elias continued, "I have come to deliver a warning." For a moment, silence held the chamber. Then the laughter began again. Louder than before, a tidal wave of mockery that crashed against the lone human standing at the center of the room. The Kreth ambassador actually slapped his clawed hand against his armored chest in the traditional gesture of supreme amusement. "A warning," he repeated, barely able to get the words out through his laughter. "This tiny creature, whose entire military could not conquer a single one of our outpost worlds, wishes to warn us. Your species measures its history in mere thousands of years," added a Velthri representative, its skin flashing with contemptuous purple. "You have barely learned to walk upright, and you think you can threaten beings who have ruled the stars since before your ancestors climbed down from the trees." The Axiom Collective speakers crackled with something that might have been digital laughter. "Statistical analysis indicates human ambassador is experiencing cognitive malfunction," it announced. "Recommend psychiatric evaluation." Through it all, Elias Vance remained perfectly still. He let them laugh. He let them mock. He let them have this moment of superiority and scorn, because he knew that in just a few minutes, none of them would ever laugh at humanity again. The laughter continued for nearly a full minute before it began to fade. Elias waited patiently, his hands folded behind his back, his expression as calm as still water. He had learned long ago that true power never needed to announce itself. It simply waited for the noise to stop. When the chamber finally grew quiet enough, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small device no larger than his thumb. It was a holographic projector, standard technology that any species in the room would have recognized. He pressed a button on its surface, and suddenly, the air above his platform filled with light. A star map appeared. Hovering in the space between Elias and the assembled delegates, it showed a region of the galaxy known as the Periphery Reach, a collection of star systems far from the core worlds that the major powers considered too remote and resource-poor to bother. Claiming 17 stars glowed softly in the projection, each one surrounded by the orbital paths of its planets. 6 hours ago, Elias said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, the Dominion of Shrath launched an invasion fleet toward human space. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Shrathi were a predatory species, known for their aggression and their complete lack of mercy. They had carved out a small empire in the Periphery Reach through brutal conquest, and the Council had long tolerated them because they served as a useful buffer against other threats. The Shrathi delegation, a group of gray-skinned creatures with far too many teeth crowded into their narrow jaws, stirred uneasily in their seats. Their lead ambassador, a scarred veteran named Krathvolume, rose to his feet with anger burning in his yellow eyes. "You dare accuse us in this sacred chamber," he snarled. "Without evidence, without I'm not accusing you of anything, Elias interrupted, his voice never rising above its conversational tone. I am simply informing the council of what was. He emphasized that final word ever so slightly. Krathvolume hesitated, confused by the past tense. The Shrothi fleet consisted of 47 capital ships, Elias continued, 1,200 support craft, and approximately 2 million ground troops. He paused to let the numbers sink in. Their stated mission, as recorded in intercepted communications, was the complete eradication of humanity and the seizure of Earth for Shrothi colonization. Now the chamber was truly silent. An invasion fleet of that size was no small matter. It represented years of construction and planning. Even the Krath, who had little love for any species but their own, seemed disturbed by the scale of the threat. And yet, the High Speaker said slowly, her mandibles clicking with uncertainty, you stand here before us, apparently unconcerned. I am unconcerned, Elias agreed, because that fleet no longer exists. He pressed another button on the projector. The image changed, zooming in on the 17 star systems of the Shrothi Dominion. For a moment, they continued to glow normally. Then, one by one, they began to flicker. Approximately 4 minutes ago, Elias said, humanity responded to the Shrothi threat. The stars flickered again, and then they went dark, all 17 of them. Gone. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the Axiom Collective's constant background hum seemed to fade into nothing. 300 alien delegates stared at the projection, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. The Shrothi invasion fleet has been completely destroyed, Elias said, his voice steady and calm. Every ship, every soldier, every piece of military equipment. He gestured toward the darkened stars. Additionally, all Shrothi military installations, orbital platforms, weapons factories, and defense networks have been eliminated. He turned to look directly at the Shrothi delegation. Krathvolume had gone pale, his gray skin turning almost white as the blood drained from his face. The Shrothi homeworld remains intact, Elias continued, as do the civilian populations of your colony worlds. But you have been reduced to a pre-industrial state. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the chamber. Your species will survive, Ambassador Krathval, and in time you will rebuild. But it will be many generations before you threaten anyone again. The Shrothi ambassador opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he possibly say in response to the annihilation of everything his people had built? We are not without mercy, Elias added quietly. The High Speaker rose from her throne, her many legs trembling beneath her. In 600 years of leading the council, she had never witnessed anything like this. Wars between species could last for centuries. Fleets clashed, and planets burned, and civilizations rose and fell over the course of generations. But this had happened in minutes. How? She whispered, her translator barely picking up the words. How is this possible? Elias turned to face her, and for the first time, something that might have been sadness flickered across his features. 18 months ago, when humanity discovered faster-than-light travel, we did not stumble upon the technology by accident. He lowered the projector and returned it to his pocket. We found something very old, something that had been waiting for us in the ice of Europa for a very long time. A single word rippled through the chamber, spoken in 100 different languages, but carrying the same meaning in all of them. Precursors, the Volthari. Ambassador's skin had gone completely pale. All color drained from his bioluminescent body. The Krath had pressed themselves back into their seats, as if trying to put distance between themselves and the human. Even the Axiom Collective had gone silent, their processors unable to calculate the implications of what they were hearing. Yes, Elias said softly. The precursors. He looked around the chamber at 300 faces frozen in various expressions of shock and fear. And now, distinguished delegates, I believe I have your full attention. The word hung in the air like a curse, spoken aloud. Precursors. Every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy knew the legends, knew the stories that had been passed down through countless generations since the first species had looked up at the stars and wondered who had come before them. The precursors had existed roughly 500 million years ago, long before the earliest ancestors of any current species had crawled out of their primordial oceans. They had built the jump gates that made faster than light travel possible. They had engineered the fundamental constants of physics that allowed organic life to thrive. They had spread across the entire galaxy and perhaps beyond, building wonders that made the greatest achievements of modern civilization look like children playing with blocks. And then, without warning and without explanation, they had vanished. All that remained were ruins too advanced to understand, artifacts too dangerous to use, and questions that had no answers. To speak of the precursors was to speak of gods, or perhaps something even greater than gods. The High Speaker lowered herself back onto her throne, her legs no longer able to support her weight. "You cannot be serious," she said. Though her voice had lost all of its earlier authority, the precursor artifacts are inert. They have been inert for hundreds of millions of years. No species has ever been able to activate them. No species until now, Elias replied. He began to walk slowly around the floating platform, his footsteps echoing in the vast silence of the chamber. When our scientists first discovered the structure beneath Europa's ice, they thought it was merely another abandoned precursor installation, dead and empty like all the others. He paused, looking up at the crystalline ceiling far above. But when they entered the structure, something remarkable happened. The lights came on. A collective gasp rose from the assembled delegates. The Axiom collective speakers crackled to life. Impossible, the machine consciousness declared. Precursor technology has never responded to external stimuli in recorded history. It never responded to your species, Elias corrected gently, because your species was not meant to activate it. He turned to face the collective's banks of processors directly. We were. The implications of that statement rippled through the chamber, like waves spreading across still water. If what the human was saying was true, it changed everything that every species believed about their place in the universe. You see, Elias continued, the precursors did not simply vanish and leave their technology behind. They planned their departure very carefully, and they knew that someday a new species would need to take their place. He walked back to the center of the platform. They could not simply leave their weapons and tools lying around for anyone to find. The galaxy would have destroyed itself in the fighting over such power, so they designed safeguards, locks that could only be opened by a very specific key. That key, the Kreth ambassador said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, is human DNA. Yes, the single word fell like a hammer blow. 4 billion years ago, the precursors seeded life on Earth, Elias explained. But they did not simply scatter the building blocks of biology and hope for the best. They engineered us, designed us from the very beginning to become exactly what we are. He held up his hand, examining it as if seeing it for the first time. Our aggression, our creativity, our stubborn refusal to accept defeat, our relentless drive to explore and expand and conquer our environment. None of it was an accident. He lowered his hand and looked out at the chamber. We were built to inherit the galaxy. The Velthari ambassador spoke up, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain calm. If what you say is true, if the precursor weapons respond only to human control, then you are the most dangerous species in the history of the galaxy. Yes, Elias agreed without hesitation. We are. You could destroy us all, the ambassador continued. Every civilization, every world, everything we have built over millions of years. Gone in an instant. Yes, Elias said again. We could. The admission hung in the air. Terrible and undeniable. 300 species, thousands of worlds, trillions of lives. All of it suddenly balanced on the edge of a knife held in human hands. The Kreth ambassador rose slowly from his seat, his massive form towering over the delegates around him. His species had built their entire culture around the concept of strength, around the belief that the powerful had the right to rule over the weak. Now he was facing a power that made his people look like insects. Why tell us this? He demanded, his voice hoarse. Why reveal your advantage when you could simply crush us all without warning? S looked up at the giant reptilian, and something strange passed across his face. It might have been pity, because that is not why we are here. He said, we did not come to the Galactic Council to threaten you. Ambassador, we came to warn you. Warn us of what? The High Speaker asked. If not of your own power, of what we might become if we are not careful, Elias replied quietly. You see, distinguished delegates, we know better than anyone what happens when a species gains power beyond their ability to control it. Because we have already done it to ourselves, many times over. He began to walk again, his voice taking on a weight of sadness that seemed to age him before their eyes. We split the atom and nearly destroyed our world. We poisoned our oceans and choked our skies and drove countless species into extinction. We built weapons capable of ending all life on our planet and came within minutes of using them. Not once, but many times. He stopped and turned to face the council. We are not proud of what we are, but we have learned from it, and that is why we are here. We are not here to conquer. We are here to ask for help. For a long moment, no one in the chamber moved or spoke the idea that a species with the power to destroy everything would come asking for help was so completely alien to their understanding of the universe that most delegates simply could not process it. The High Speaker finally found her voice, though it came out weak and uncertain. You possess weapons capable of annihilating entire civilizations in minutes, and you come before us asking for help. I do not understand. Elias nodded slowly, as if he had expected this confusion. Let me try to explain it another way. He said, when my species first looked up at the stars, we told ourselves stories about what we might find there. Gods and monsters, paradise and hell. We imagined that the universe would either embrace us or destroy us. He began to walk again, his footsteps slow and measured. But in all our stories, in all our dreams and nightmares, we never imagined that we would become the gods ourselves. He stopped and turned to face the Kreth ambassador directly. Your species conquered 12 systems through force and intimidation, and you are proud of this achievement. You built an empire on the bones of the weak and called it strength. The Kreth bared his teeth but said nothing. My species conquered our own world 100 times over. Elias continued. We enslaved each other based on the color of our skin. We slaughtered each other over which invisible God was the true one. We drew lines in the dirt and killed millions to defend them. His voice grew heavier with each word. We are not better than you, Ambassador. We are perhaps worse, because we did all of this to our own kind, to our own brothers and sisters, to people who shared our blood and our history. He looked around the chamber at 300 silent faces, and every single time, every empire built on fear and violence and the domination of the weak, every single one of them fell. Some took centuries to collapse. Others fell within a generation, but they all fell, because empires built on force cannot last, he said. They plant the seeds of their own destruction from the very beginning. And sooner or later, those seeds grow. The chamber remained silent. But something had shifted in the air. The fear was still there. But now it was mixed with something else, something that might have been curiosity, or perhaps even hope, when we discovered the precursor weapons, Elias continued. We realized that we had been given a choice. We could use this power to conquer the galaxy, to bend every species to our will, to build an empire that would make the greatest civilizations in history look like footnotes. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the assembled delegates. Or we could choose a different path. The Velthari ambassador leaned forward, his bioluminescent skin pulsing with soft gold, the color of deep interest. What path do you propose? He asked. Partnership, Elias replied simply. Cooperation, mutual growth, and protection. Not domination. He gestured toward the darkened stars, still displayed in the holographic projection that floated above the chamber. We have demonstrated what we are capable of when threatened. The Shrath believed we were weak because we were young. They believed they could destroy us without consequence. And now their military lies in ruins across 17 star systems. But, he added, his voice softening, we did not destroy their people. We did not glass their worlds or poison their water or murder their children. We eliminated the threat and left the rest intact. This was not mercy, he said. It was a choice. A conscious decision to use only as much force as necessary and no more. The Kreth ambassador rumbled deep in his chest. A sound of grudging respect. You could have wiped them out completely, he said. Ended their species forever. Yes, but you chose not to. Yes. Why? Elias took a deep breath before answering. Because we have seen what happens when one group decides that another group does not deserve to exist. We have done it to each other more times than we can count, and every time, every single time. It has diminished us. He looked up at the giant reptilian. The power to destroy is not strength, Ambassador. It is simply destruction. True strength is the ability to destroy and choosing not to. The High Speaker rose again from her throne, her legs steadier now than they had been before. You are asking us to believe that a species with unlimited power will voluntarily limit itself, she said. You are asking us to trust that you will not simply change your minds tomorrow and decide to conquer us after all. Yes, Elias admitted. I am asking you to trust us, and I know how difficult that is. How impossible it might seem. He walked toward her throne, stopping at the edge of the platform. But consider this. If we wanted to conquer you, would we be standing here talking? Would we have revealed our capabilities? Would we have given you time to prepare defenses or form alliances against us? He shook his head. If conquest was our goal, you would already be conquered. The fact that you are still free, that this council still exists, that your species still control your own destinies, that should tell you something about our intentions. The High Speaker's compound eyes studied the human for a long moment. What exactly are you requesting? She asked finally. Full membership in the Galactic Council, Elias replied. A seat at this table, equal voice in galactic affairs, and the opportunity to build relationships with other species based on mutual benefit rather than fear. He straightened his posture and met her gaze directly. We know what we are capable of. We know the darkness that lives inside us, and we know that without allies, without partners to hold us accountable and remind us of our better nature, we may someday become exactly the monsters you fear. We are asking you to help us become something better. The silence that followed Elias Vance's request stretched for what felt like an eternity. 300 alien delegates sat frozen in their seats, each one wrestling with the impossible situation before them. They had come to this chamber expecting to mock a primitive species, to send them back to their small corner of the galaxy with their tails between their legs. Instead, they had witnessed the death of 17 star systems and learned that the youngest species in the galaxy was also the most powerful, and now that species was asking to join them as equals. The High Speaker was the first. To move, she turned to look at the other delegates, her compound eyes scanning the chamber for any sign of consensus. What she saw surprised her. The Velthari, whose bioluminescent skin had cycled through fear and shock and confusion, now glowed with soft gold and silver, the colors of respect and cautious optimism. The Axiom Collective, which had spent the entire conversation calculating probabilities and strategic implications, broadcast a single statement. Proposal represents optimal outcome for continued galactic stability. Even the Krath, whose entire civilization was built on the principle that might makes right, seemed to be reconsidering their position. Their ambassador stood silent and thoughtful, his massive clawed hands folded in front of him in a posture that his species reserved for moments of deep contemplation. "I call for a vote," the High Speaker announced, her voice echoing through the chamber. "All those in favor of granting the human species full membership in the Galactic Council, signal your approval." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the Velthari ambassador raised his hand, his skin flashing bright gold. The Axiom Collective speakers hummed with affirmation. One by one, delegates across the chamber began to signal their support. Some did so eagerly, recognizing an opportunity to ally themselves with the new power in the galaxy. Others did so reluctantly, driven more by fear than genuine agreement, but they did so nonetheless. Even the Krath ambassador, after a long moment of hesitation, raised his massive arm when the final count was tallied. The vote was unanimous. Humanity had been accepted into the Galactic Council. The High Speaker turned back to face Elias, her mandibles clicking in what her translator identified as genuine surprise. "In 600 years, I have never seen a unanimous vote on any matter," she said. "You have achieved something remarkable, Ambassador Vance." Elias allowed himself a small smile, the first expression of emotion he had shown since entering the chamber. "I hope this is only the beginning," he replied as the formal proceedings concluded and delegates began to rise from their seats. The Krath ambassador made his way down from the upper tiers. His massive form cast a shadow over Elias as he approached. But there was no threat in his posture. Instead, there was something that looked almost like curiosity. "Walk with me." "Human." The Krath rumbled. Elias nodded and fell into step beside the giant reptilian as they made their way toward the chamber's exit. For several minutes, they walked in silence through the crystal corridors of the station, past windows that looked out on the endless stars. Finally, the Krath spoke. "Your species could have taken everything," he said. "You could have ruled the entire galaxy with an iron fist. You could have done to us what we have done to so many others." He stopped and turned to face Elias, his yellow eyes searching the human's face. "Why did you not take what was rightfully yours through strength?" Elias considered the question carefully before answering. "Let me tell you a story," he said, "about something that happened on my world. Long before we ever reached the stars." He began walking again, and the Krath followed. "Thousands of years ago, there was an empire on Earth that conquered nearly all of the known world. They had the most powerful military, the most advanced technology, the greatest wealth and resources. They believed that their power would last forever, that their empire was eternal and unbreakable. And then it fell." The Krath made a rumbling sound of acknowledgement. "All empires fall eventually. This is known." "Yes," Elias agreed. "But here is what most people forget. The empire did not fall because it was conquered from outside. It fell because it collapsed from within." He stopped at a large window overlooking a nebula that blazed with colors beyond human description. "When you build a society on domination and fear, you create enemies with every conquest. You breed resentment and hatred in every heart, and eventually, that poison seeps into everything." He turned to face the Krath. "We have made that mistake so many times. Ambassador, we have built empires on the backs of slaves and watched them crumble. We have conquered nations and then wondered why they refused to stay conquered. We have learned, through rivers of blood and mountains of corpses, that there has to be another way. The Kreth was silent for a long moment. And you believe this council, this partnership you speak of, is that other way? I believe it is our best chance, Elias replied. Not just for humanity, but for everyone. He looked out at the stars. The precursors gave us the power to rule through force. But they also gave us something else, a choice. We can become the tyrants that the galaxy fears, or we can become something new, something that has never existed before. What would that be? The Kreth asked. Elias smiled. And there was something ancient and weary and hopeful in his eyes, a species that learned from its mistakes. The Kreth studied the human for a long moment, and then he did something that no member of his species had done in the presence of an alien for over 10,000 years. He bowed his head. Perhaps, he rumbled, your species is wiser than we believed. No, Elias said softly. We are not wise. We are just old enough to have made every possible mistake. He looked up at the towering reptilian. The question now is whether we are smart enough not to repeat them, and whether the rest of the galaxy is willing to help us stay on the right path, above them. Through the station's transparent dome, the stars burned cold and eternal, as they had for billions of years and would continue to do for billions more. Somewhere among those lights, 17 star systems lay dark and silent, a reminder of what humanity could do when threatened. And somewhere else, a small blue world called Earth continued its endless journey around its unremarkable sun, its people unaware that their future had just changed forever, not through conquest, not through surrender, but through the oldest human trick of all, refusing to become the monster. The Kreth straightened and gestured down the corridor. Come, Ambassador Vance. There is much work to be done if we are to build this new future you speak of. Elias nodded and fell into step beside his former enemy behind them. The chamber of the Galactic Council stood empty and quiet, its crystal walls still pulsing with soft blue light. But something had changed within those ancient walls. Something fundamental had shifted in the balance of power that had governed the galaxy for millions of years. A new voice had been added to the chorus of civilizations, a young voice, scarred by its own history, burdened by the weight of power it never asked for. But determined to choose a different path, humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same again.